Welcome to Richard Listens live here at the UBN Radio TV studios. I'm the producer and co-host for the evening, Peter Sobey. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and the namesake of the show, Dr. Richard Ohlberger, PhD.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, and it's your show. I'm the one that's really glad to be here and honored to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited we got to do this tonight. I've been looking forward to talking about sports and development, and this is something I'm very passionate about and excited about, and something I'm spending more and more of my time, on the field and on the courts, and
amazing,
enjoying it. Yeah.
And so, let's get the audience up to speed. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard Ohlberger, PhD. What's the deal?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm private practice psychologist, have an office in Beverly Hills, and I'm also a youth soccer coach and sports parent. And I've been training in something the last couple of years called somatic experiencing, which I've been doing a little bit of public speaking about, which involves getting people back in their bodies, getting people active, and I realized that I'd have to do this a little bit myself if I'm going to get people going with it. So I've been also trying to push myself and accomplish some new obstacles and get back getting active again and get back into my own body.
And that's amazing. And I do want you to share a little bit more of that with the audience. But first, you've got your own practice. You're in Beverly Hills. What type of people do you generally see?
I see anyone from 12 and up, so it can be individuals, teenagers, couples, families, and I see people struggling with life transitions, maybe traumas, depression, anxiety, whole range of the life spectrum. Wow,
that is a big spectrum. And you said now recently you've been doing a lot with somatic experiencing.
Yes, I did a tour for 5 years of working LA County Department of Mental Health and got to experience people in all kinds of crisis, from high schools down to Skid Row, and been using somatic experience, sort of realizing that everybody I'm coming into contact with, it's kind of like an electromagnetic cocktail. When you meet them, they're meeting your system where you're at, and you're meeting them where they're at, and depending on the environment, it can be highly volatile systems interacting. So it kind of led me on this journey of taking a look at the way in which my body experiences stress and crisis, and going a little bit deeper into learning about interpersonal neurobiology and these big words, which really just start to explain how does your body experience your emotions.
So you're saying that's what somatic experiencing is?
Somatic experiencing is learning to get in touch with maybe a little bit of our own animal nature, trying to understand the ways in which our body remembers and where our body stores some of our emotions. So it could be in the form of some modern-day syndromes and pains, can be the back, the stomach, headaches, all kinds of different experiences which manifest to all of us, even the healthiest one of us, or even the highest level performing artist or athlete, may start to experience something on a given day when their whole life they could have been a stallion. They could be a really high performer, and something personal or something, lately we've heard of athletes from certain countries when they have a crisis in their home nation, and how that affects them can really be disruptive on their performance and on their psyche.
Like what recently are you talking about?
There was something going on in Colombia. I'm not quite sure what the crisis is, but I know a couple of the Colombian baseball players. Both has a polarizing effect of bringing them together across teams, where they're starting to worry about their family members and communities back home. And even the way that they may be playing sports in a different country, may be doing so to, represent their country or to, support their family. So it can really be a distraction when something's going on in the world of concern that involves that, basically is preoccupying them so they can't really focus on a sport.
Interesting. And bringing up sports psychology, basically what that is that's an area that you're getting more and more into, correct?
Yes, I love sports my whole life. I feel like, if I had a dollar for every game I've analyzed or player or stat sheet I've broken down, but it's something I'm becoming more and more fascinated with, because athletes are people too. And the more I grow and learn, the more I understand that, athletes, they go through injury, they go through life events, and especially with the growing focus in my own family and in society on youth sports, the need for understanding exactly the healthier ways of doing things, perhaps, and what ways maybe aren't working or could be having reverse effects.
And it's interesting that you bring up youth sports because that is a great segue. Basically, the topic of today's show is going to be youth sports. And, that ties in with sports psychology, youth psychology, and across the board. And we do have a guest in the studio with us today that would be the perfect time to introduce him. So without further ado, Richard, why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, without further ado, yes. We have here a dear friend and coach who I've come to know over the last, I believe it's 2.5, 3 years, who is not only a dedicated professional but a dedicated coach, and he really embodies for me a lot of what youth sports can do to really help develop character and sportsmanship and teamwork. And I've been proud to be able to witness, several young adults developing in a cohort around this team and in the program. So
what an amazing introduction. And what's his name?
His name is Chris Johnson.
I don't know if I can live up to all that. That was a lot. But, thank you.
That was a great introduction. And now, Chris, before we start digging way into the sports psychology and youth coaching and the psychology of it and everything, you not only coach a youth soccer team, but you're a music producer?
That's correct. Yeah, music producer. And in fact, the building that we just walked by is a building that I actually produce records in, and the one next door, next to UBN Studios, is a place where some of the biggest records in Hollywood were made. So yeah, I am a record producer, and fortunate enough to be able to not only nurture the budding careers of young soccer players, but also of young recording artists.
And that's amazing that then you take those leadership skills and everything from producing music all this time, and now you're a youth coach.
Well, a big part of what I do is not necessarily lead, but it's encourage people to try to be the best that they can be in any given situation. As a music producer, it's really about breaking down the walls of fear and helping the artists that I work with be authentic, be themselves, reveal themselves to their audience, and basically to tell the truth. So as a music producer, that's my biggest role, is to get the artists that I work with to be authentic and be honest and tell the truth. And as a youth soccer coach, I would say that some of those things are true. It's for kids to stop worrying about what people think of them, what their peers think of them, what their parents think about them, and to really be free to be creative and play a sport that they love. Because that's the essence of both making music and playing soccer, is its creativity, both sides. When kids are not self-conscious on the field, they play their best soccer. And when artists are not self-conscious in the studio, they give their best performances. So there's a lot of duality between the two.
And this is interesting because now we have a youth coach, and here we have a sports psychology expert. So how do those mesh together? Because you're also a coach for the kids' soccer, right?
Yeah, well, certainly I'm dealing with 6-year-olds when I've coached, so it's more like herding sheep. But some of the principles, that Chris were mentioning really, stood out to me. One is, fear. And although it shows up certainly quite differently over the ages, fear is a major thing, even for a young child, depending on if they've ever played before and all of a sudden they're out there and there's physical contact, or there's parental commotion on the sideline. There's other kids getting into their space depending on how they are with their own sense of space and contact, and their own sense of their own bodies in motion. Sometimes coordination is not quite there yet, so it can be more like a monstrous clash in the center field. So a lot of the role is about teaching boundaries, teaching about how to move and protect your space without obviously aggression, which is a major point of learning. How comfortable are you becoming assertive without harming someone else, and fair play. This concept of playing fairly, sportsmanship, respecting other people and their space, and not harming them, and still having fun in the process. So and the main thing that you're building a team, and you're coming together and you're being with your team. That the importance of practice is so important. So we spent a lot of time, focusing on, the old Allen Iverson, adage where he's, barking about practice. But it's really important for simulating how the team comes together. How do you relate? When can you connect to each other? Can you joke around a little bit when things aren't so stressful? Can you simulate game play when it's not stressful, so that you can handle it then when it's time to perform?
What do you mean simulate gameplay when it's not stressful, like in practice?
Yeah, in practice situations, exactly. You want to be able to kind of work on, if you've never shot a ball before and you're embarrassed that you kick it off your toe, or you kick it 5 feet wide of the goal every time, or it doesn't reach the goal. Being able to do that with somebody who can slow it down for you, really break it down into components, make it manageable, and build confidence on each of those stages.
Right.
Yeah, because there may be a kid who's watching, they've watched soccer on TV and they're like, I should be able to, So depending on how they process their fear or their confidence level, maybe if you come from a family with siblings who've played before, it may just be natural for you to get out there and give it a shot and not think about it. But for other kids, it can be really intimidating.
And now, as far as that goes, Chris, our coaching expert over here, what kind of philosophy do you bring? Because not only are you shaping, young sports minds, but you're shaping young minds. And at the age, and you're coaching which ages?
Boys under 14, which is primarily 12, 13, and some 14-year-olds.
And you're saying that's, an impressionable time.
It certainly is. It's, I'm not a sports psychology or a kid psychology expert, but certainly having been around the block a few times with this, it's an age where kids really start to develop a sense of personal identity and kind of who they are in the world. And as a coach, I feel a certain responsibility to each of the kids that I've been privileged enough to coach. And even during the course of one season, there may be 20 or 25 kids, depending on whether we're in regular season play, postseason play, tournaments, whatever we're doing. So I feel, an obligation to the kids and to the parents to try to, help them to develop a positive self-esteem, to be able to, like Richard was saying, to be able to engage in high-level play without anger, to be able to play very at the limits of their ability, physically, with a lot of passion, and if they take a hard hit, to not get angry, to be able to play at an extraordinarily high level, and to be clear-headed and present. It's not easy with boys this age. There's a lot of ego attached to it. There's peer pressure. There's pressure from parents. There's pressure from, especially with some of the Latino kids, we'll have a whole family show up, and they know this sport way better than I'll ever know it. They grew up playing it in Colombia and Ecuador and Guatemala and, where soccer is a religion. And so I feel a great responsibility to not only preserve the game and to do the best I can, but to also help these young boys, as they're in their transition from being adolescents into being teenagers.
And what's part of your philosophy? You were discussing earlier about, no ego, and that how do you translate that to the kids? You were saying like no celebration.
We do. We really, we spend a lot of time together. It's about a 10-month season, and it's a lot for the kids and it's a lot for the parents, but everyone has so much passion and enthusiasm for this particular team that I really haven't had to push anybody into doing it. There's, a lot of people who want to participate. And, really we kind of buy into the theory that we play the sport for the sake of the sport. And it is not about individual achievement. It is about being contributors to a team, buying into a philosophy that we are all in this together. And the best players raise up the players who are less skilled and maybe less experienced. And, it's very, very common in kids' sports for certain kids to get a lot of praise, for get a lot of attention, and then for other kids to be left on the sidelines, to be left on the bench with with what can be tremendously low self-esteem, with a shattered sense of self-confidence and self-image. So what we do in this particular environment is we don't make kids superstars, and we don't make kids weak players. They're all contributors to a part of a greater whole. And as a result, the best players pass the ball to the weakest players. Not always. There's a level of trust, that has to be earned when we're in competition. But all the kids really trust each other. They become good friends, And I think both on and off the field, they have a certain camaraderie that enables them to not blame each other when a play goes wrong or when a goal gets scored against us, or when we lose match after match, which we have. We had a tough fall season, but we've had an amazing tournament season so far this year. But the kids really are able to bond together. It's one of the things I try to do is try to not make it about the parents and their desire to have a kid who's on a winning team. It is poison for kids to feel that way. It's poison for kids to feel like they have the responsibility of having to win or be shamed by their parents, coaches. So, I try to maintain a philosophy of it is about the moment. It is about, there's 4 quarters in an American Youth Soccer Organization game at this age group. So it's about each quarter. It's about each play. It's about doing the best they can. It is not about outcome. It's about process as far as I'm concerned. And when we keep it focused on process, the kids have the greatest time in the world. And we make it about outcome, they hang their heads in shame, and they walk off the field defeated. They go home without saying a word. When we make it about process, they do the best they can, and they walk off the field with their heads high, even if we suffer a loss.
And there's a lot of sports psychology in that, Dr. Richard, wouldn't you say?
There absolutely is. I mean, one of the profound things that I was able to witness was, I think, one particular game where a team believed they were up by 2 goals, and I think they made the same mistake. I guess we'll call it a rookie mistake. I think 3 times in a row where the ball just helplessly dropped between the goalie and 3 defenders, and one small guy from the other team just came and poked it right by, and they hopelessly watched it dribble into the goal, and they lost that match. And you could see how frustrating it was for them, and probably how difficult it was not to blame one of the 4 standing looking at each other. And what I was amazed about was within 20 minutes after the match, a little hydration, a Gatorade, and a snack later, and they were laughing together, playing together, and on to the next one. And that's a testament to, the way in which the coach holds the space for the players to be a little disappointed, to be a little frustrated, but does not allow for divisiveness or blame, because there's a valuable lesson. It was really one major learning point probably from that game, about communication, which I'm sure, I know most adults have trouble with it. So, for 12-year-old to 13-year-old boys, good luck.
No doubt.
That's one we got to probably reinforce repeatedly.
And as coaches, is that something you address to the kids afterwards, even though do you guys actually say, like, hey, did you notice you guys let up your guard and that guy came in, or do you kind of let them soak that in themselves?
I think there's a time and a place. It's really difficult, I'm sure Coach Chris will speak to it, but the tendency as coaches is to yell out something like communicate, which is a directive. And in the moment when the body's freezing up from not sure, uncertainty of whose responsibility it is, it's not just a verbal thing. It's something that's going on in terms of, Chris mentioned, trust. Whose responsibility is what? Who's the one who's supposed to dictate? Or who do we defer to in cases where we don't know? So those are wonderful things to practice about, because and some people who, in this case, the goaltender, some people will defer that's really your job. So that's where coaches really have to instill a philosophy of trust and teamwork and communication. And you can draw upon that painful experience and that loss. Losses can be wonderful learning experiences, because you certainly don't want to have that feeling again where you were that close and you probably were ahead in the game, and nobody chose to make the decisive action. Sometimes being too polite and deferring, standing back and letting the other one take the turn can be a drawback for a team.
Yeah, that's quite a conundrum, actually.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to, break apart the players individually and sit them down and talk about their frustration and talk about, what their process was, where they may be looking to one bigger, stronger player and thinking that that's going to be, that's going to be the one who saves the day and doesn't let something get through their back line, or that's going to be the player who scores the winning goal for them. And there's a dependency on that, anchor or leader to take care of things for the team. So, and that can be a little bit troublesome because over the course of a season, there's going to be a place for that. Like Chris was mentioning, that the smaller guy, the guy who maybe wasn't as talented, wasn't as strong, he's going to get the playing time, and then there's going to be that opening for him. And if he doesn't believe he can take it, it could hurt his team.
And now, since we're talking about youth sports right now, and Chris, you're the youth sports soccer coach in this scenario. Like, how young is too young to start dealing with some of these issues? And actually, you know what? Before we'll get back to that question, but we do have a caller, and let's go ahead and take that caller and see what he has to say.
Let's go.
All right. Hello, caller. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, what's your name, caller?
Hey, so my name's Yehuda.
Hey, Yehuda. Thanks for calling in, and I'll let Dr. Richard take it away.
Hi, Yehuda. How are
Sounds
you?
good.
You have a question for us today?
Yeah. So my question is, I've been to a couple of soccer games recently, children's soccer games, and I see that the parents and the coaches usually yell at the kids on the field. So I want to know, how do you help a child cope with this?
Oh, good question, Yehuda. Thank you.
Well, certainly I've never been guilty of that, Yehuda. So, no, it's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. So the question is, how do we deal with coaches or parents yelling on the sideline at their children?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the answer is kind of, twofold. Number one, kind of creating a team culture or even a league culture or amongst the parents. Parental involvement in youth sports is becoming, more and more prevalent. And parents, and they may, if you can hold a parents' meeting, and certainly in your electronic communication, nowadays so much being done via email, but parents need to understand that their role is to support development, team development, character development, and that and they may need to be really specifically told, your role is to cheer, to encourage, to support the team, but they need to be maybe made aware that there's no room for that kind of behavior, and it is a competitive sport, so. Like any other rule, parents will get emotional, and as the games get more competitive, certainly as the ages get older, they will likely lose sight of this fact. And as a coach, your job may be to take a look and see if some of your parents are exhibiting some problem behavior or becoming a problem parent. And I guess the old adage goes, if you don't know who the problem parent is, it may be yourself. So take a look in the mirror. And as coaches, we're certainly been a party to teams where it is the coach who's exhibiting the behavior that's giving us a little bit of pause and causing the kids. They may not show it on the field, but they may freeze up and exhibit some behaviors and some embarrassment, or they may just shut down because they're confused why they're getting yelled at. It's not a good motivator. And depending on the parent and where they've come or how they were raised. If they were raised an athlete, they may think that was good enough for them, and that may be what they should do. But it's our job as parents, coaches, to kind of find the right way to speak to that parent, pull them aside when the kid's not present, maybe an off the field meeting, but to certainly let them know it's not effective and it's not helpful.
Great answer. Great question. Thanks for calling in, Yehuda.
Thank you.
Have a great night. All right. Always exciting here on Richard Listens when we get calls. That's very, very,
Keep 'em
very,
coming.
very exciting. So now that was a great answer. Coach Chris, do you have anything to add to that aspect about angry coaches and parents on the sidelines?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think he's going to list all the instances, which I was the problem.
No. But I can say that I have a son who plays on the youth soccer team that I coach, and Richard's son is on it as well. And I also have an older son who's 19, who was an elite kid athlete who did his first triathlon at 12 and was on a travel swim team and just played every sport at a fairly elite level. He didn't really enjoy sports, but he had a mental quickness and a physical ability that enabled him to accelerate very, very quickly at a young age. We found that the more he accelerated, the more the coaches yelled at him, and the more he enjoyed the experience of playing less, whether it was football, basketball, soccer, where I at least had some control, and particularly as a travel team swimmer, the better he did, the more he got yelled at, and the more he was standing on that winner's stage, or the more he had the ribbon or the trophy or the medal, the more pressure he was under. And by the time he was 14, he had little desire to play sports. And it wasn't until he suffered a pretty bad injury in high school that he stopped playing sports altogether. His journey through kids' sports was not very favorable. So I made very well sure that my younger son's journey was a much, much different kind of a journey. So in regard to angry coaches and angry parents, we're at a time in kids' sports which is very extraordinary in a lot of ways. Little League really changed the game for kids' sports. Little League was the first time that kids' sports became entertainment for adults. It was really about going to the national championship and playing in front of 9,000 people, 5,000 people, which most 10, 11, and 12-year-olds are not equipped to do psychologically. They are not equipped to be able to withstand that kind of pressure. So what's
you're saying like the Little League World Series that now is on ESPN and all that?
Absolutely correct. And what it's done is it's created a competitiveness in kids' sports that where it's become systematic of kids' sports where parents are screaming, coaches are screaming, and there's a hysteria behind. My son plays basketball in an inner city league during the summer, and people go crazy. I mean, the kids play at a pretty high level, and they're very much into it. I think they ignore the parents, but and Richard will attest to this. We travel all over Southern California to soccer tournaments, and we hear parents, grown men, screaming at the top of their lungs, shaming kids right in front of us, right in front of the parents. The parents don't even do anything to stop it. And this is, I mean, it's much worse in baseball and particularly football. Youth football is a nightmare of screaming parents. I mean, you've heard of Southern California parents getting in fights in the parking lot. What happens is the kids just become pawns in a parent's game. It's about ego, it's about winning, where your kid's status on the team is almost like buying a Cadillac. It's become, and that's one of the principles about American Youth Soccer Organization, AYSO, that I appreciate so much, is that it's principle-driven. It's principle-driven and to the fact where coaches and parents and administrators and board members, we all have a unified mission, a unified purpose. That doesn't mean that everyone adheres to that mission statement, that's for sure, because we go to tournaments and it gets pretty ugly. Our team in particular, though, we have pretty much an oath that we take that we do not yell at the kids in anger ever. And if I ever hear one of our parents yell at the kids in anger, I don't yell at them in anger. I say, do you find that your kid performs better when you're angry at them or when you encourage them? And if it's when you encourage them, I would advise you to encourage them. And I'm friends with most of the parents. We've been through a lot of practices and tournaments together. But that's really, I've never seen a kid play better or perform better, and particularly with soccer, be more creative when he is under the intense scrutiny and pressure of an adult's anger than he is able to perform when he has the support, the love, and the encouragement of his parents, the spectators, and particularly his own teammates. So we've been able to create a culture with this particular team where there's a tremendous amount of encouragement from parents, from players, from everyone involved in the teams. The weakest players get just as much praise as the best players. And it's a way that we've been able to kind of circumvent parents, getting too involved. Now, at our last tournament, we had one parent get thrown out of the tournament because he was yelling at the referee, which we have an absolute rule. You do not yell at the referees, ever. And I even said to the team, and the team is, they hardly ever speak to the referees, unlike other teams where players are screaming at them. We have never seen a referee change their mind by being yelled at by a parent or a player, ever, not one time. In fact, we think it has the contrary action. And just to address one more thing that you had were talking about earlier, after a match, even a devastating loss, I huddle the team together and I ask the same questions when we win or when we lose. And the first question I ask, even after, if let's say we lose 5-1, which in soccer is quite a beating, I will say to the team, I'll huddle them around and I'll say, what did we do great in this match? And they'll just look at me like we lost. I'll say, but what did we do good? Were there passes, were there shots, where was there ball movement? What did we do that was good? And invariably the hands will come up. And then I'll say, what could we have done better? And if they point the fingers at each other, I will immediately cut that off. And I will ask them, really as a coach, think like a coach, what could we have done better? And then they become part of the strategy. They become part of the fabric of the decision making. And suddenly we're thinking about the team. We're not thinking about individuals. We're not thinking about the loss. It all leads back to process. It all leads back to how can we do better? How can we work together better? What mechanics can we improve on? And those are the things that I think really matter to the kids. They want to get up and kick the ball. They want to pass the ball. They want to be strategic. They want to make great plays. Process empowers the kids to be so creative and so passionate about what they do that it really brings out the best in them. And another thing on our team is we don't celebrate. A kid can score an amazing goal. We don't encourage kids to pump their fists in the air and get down on their knees like Cristiano Ronaldo and some of the other big players do, which the fans love, because we feel that it's an exercise of ego in a lot of ways. And what we do is we're a team. That player was able to score because the defense kicked that ball up the field. So they're all part of a bigger whole. And another thing is after matches, we don't have big celebrations and rub it in the other team's face. We shake hands with dignity and humility, whether we win or lose, and we go over and we applaud the other team's parents and players. And we try to do this very, very regularly. And I think what's happened is it's created a general respect that the kids have for each other, for their opponents, for the parents on our sideline, and particularly for the parents and the fans on the other sideline.
That's great. And now, those are a lot of great insights. The show's called Richard Listens. Richard, you've done some good listening here to Chris, Coach Chris.
He's good to listen to.
But part of the idea of you doing this show is to teach people and for people to learn. And obviously you're here to help people. But in listening to all that, teach us a little bit of the clinical side of that. There's a couple of terms that you were speaking of.
Right. Well, the first thing that came to mind when Chris was speaking was, some of this is, classical conditioning. If you learn to respond only when your coach shames you, this is, going back to Psych 101 for all of you interested in studying it in college, so that when you start to get attention that is negative, when it's shameful or yelling, in a way, it's aversive. You want to avoid that. So you may play harder because you don't want to, come off the field and be rejected by your parents. On the other hand, you learn to need that kind of negative attention to get motivated. So, it's kind of a contradiction where, we're creating this. If you don't get yelled at, you're doing okay. And if you are getting screamed at, then, change something. So it's not teaching trust and effective communication between our mentors, our parents, our guides, our coaches, our community. It's creating a culture of kind of fear and intimidation. And that's going to get exercised on the field as well. That's going to come out in the form of, bullying or, certain cheap shots or aggression or looking for ways to get any advantage they can just to win. And so the other thing I think we were talking about earlier was the concept that just the fact that a youth or a person is being observed changes the way in which they perform and will increase their performance. So in other words, just the fact that these kids, regardless of socioeconomic status, we're certainly seeing, every area of LA County coming together. Teams are pretty diverse. And you're seeing just the fact that they have a coach, just the fact that they have parental support. And hopefully, we encourage that to whatever extent it's possible in that given family unit. And families take all, different appearances these days, will help a kid to develop and perform better because they want to do well for that coach. Just the fact that there's someone showing up for them and committing to them and taking that responsibility. So when you get a whole team of people wanting to perform better and coming together, and you put the right, quality of nurture in that environment, the results can be magical. And I think that, we hope that parents really understand that role, that power that they have. And we hope the coaches don't abuse that power, but it becomes, really, really challenging once you get a taste of winning. It becomes really fearful of losing that title or that ability. I mean, it's in the media now with SportsCenter and all the major sports. If you have one losing season, your job's in jeopardy. So, I think a coach of the 49ers a few years ago, I think he had...
he lasted 1 year.
Yeah, well, he had three almost, maybe one Super Bowl and 2 championships or something like that, and that wasn't
But the
enough.
guy after him, that was just there 1 year, and he was one and done, right?
Oh, when they came after him?
Yeah.
I think so.
The guy that came after Harbaugh for 1 year, and then they fired him.
Exactly. I don't know why I'm afraid to mention his name, but yes, it's happening. And, you don't bring home the championship. You don't bring home those Final Fours for a couple years. You don't make it to the World Cup. And they may not be so concerned with your process. So, in a lot of ways, we're working from the bottom up, starting with youth culture, and especially with soccer, where they think the country has kind of gotten more excited about it. In terms of how to develop and how to cultivate a team presence and an excitement and a love for the game without, having to damage self-esteem along the way, or create this, win at all costs mentality.
It sounds like a part of what you're both talking about with youth coaching is not only inspiring the children and everything, but correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're dealing with parents a lot too. There's a lot of teaching and coaching that you need to do to the parents to kind of help coach their child along. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I don't think that some parents, maybe they are aware on some level. I mean, myself included. We're all human beings, and there's a lot of research out there that in a lot of ways parents are trying to work through their own successes or failures as an athlete, or with their own parents as in their own support. And their own athletic journey through their children. So depending on what's happening, if your kid is doing really well and excelling, maybe there's no conflict. If your kid is struggling or not playing as much, you may see something different. That parent may not even be aware of what's happening. And it can be a collision of multiple variables. There's also personal variables, what's going on in the family, what's going on at work for that particular individual. What's going on in the family unit.
Right. Chris, what would you say is some of the more rewarding aspects of coaching youth? We've talked a lot about, a lot of the psychology of it, but what's some of the rewarding parts about it for you?
I mean, honestly, to be entrusted with the care of young men or boys, and to be given the level of trust that I get from the parents, that alone is pretty extraordinary, and it's a big responsibility. But certainly when I see these kids come together and support each other, when I see, let's say, the best player on the team walk off the field with a player who isn't as experienced and have his arm around him, and they have a serious chat as they walk off the field, those moments are just something, it's hard to kind of capture them or quantify, their value when they're happening. But looking back, those are really the experiences. And, have we celebrated some amazing, just this season, we won the biggest AYSO tournament in Southern California. We came in first place, and that's after losing every game of the regular season. And then the next tournament we came into, we were out in 3 games, and I drive a lot of kids to and from. Their families who have to work every game. They never get to see their kids play, so I give a lot of rides. And so we were out in 3 games. In the next tournament, we played against teams that were much, much bigger, much faster, much older. When the kids walked onto the field, they just looked at their opponents and they looked at us like, we can do this. And we ended up winning the tournament. We ended up coming in first place. And these kids were faster, bigger, older, and were extraordinary soccer players. But to see the kids really dig down as a team and engage in a state of self-belief individually and as a team, it's kind of like it doesn't get any better than that. You know what I mean? It's just to see these boys, and some of them I've been with for quite a few years, to see them dig down deep and really stand up for each other and stand up for themselves and kind of adhere to some of the philosophies that we as parents believe in. It's an extraordinary experience. And Richard has us over to his house on Saturdays sometimes when we're doing tournaments, and we all come in covered with dirt, and we'll all pile into his house, and he feeds everybody. And I have sleepovers and tournaments where I've got five kids still in their uniforms falling asleep on the floor. We'll all get up and have breakfast and go to a tournament together. So there's a real camaraderie between the parents. I mean, Richard and I have become good friends on a personal level. I've been friends with his wife, and obviously our kids are good friends, and we're kind of, all the parents become great friends. So there's kind of like a family feel to what we do, and I think we're all kind of purpose driven, and that we're doing this because we love our children and we want the best for them. And I think that we all feel a responsibility to each other's kids as well. And I think that those are probably the best moments. It's not really the goal that gets scored. It's not the championship that gets won. It's not getting our picture in some local paper. What it really is, it's the celebration that the kids are able to have and what we're able to do to contribute to their lives at the end of the day.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So Chris spoke to a couple really important things there that I heard, which were rituals, rites of passage, the bonding. That in a way the youth are looking for. What am I supposed to do at this stage of development? How do I get there? And these acts of not only playing together, the importance of really enjoying getting into your body, having fun, testing your limits, facing fears, supporting each other in ways that are uncomfortable, and that's completely different depending on, who you are as a kid. And in a way, a lot of developmental theorists say our peers see us and push us in ways that our parents and coaches cannot. So, in a way, that culture that gets created is a community. Chris mentioned family. It creates this kind of bond, and you'll see that most sports films you watch, right? It's creating this family, this oneness, which becomes kind of an identity.
And sports become this interesting analogy for life because in sports, it all happens so quickly. In the course of a few hours, it's like what kids experience in months, because we show up and they're a little shy to talk to each other, and they're unaware of, they're maybe a little unsure of their environment. And that's just like going to school for the first day. So there's all these things that get replicated during the sports experience, even on a single game, that replicate the challenges of living life. And in sports, it happens so very quickly. They're challenged with physical, with being hit really hard, or having to play a really physical game and control their anger. Our team plays very, very physically, but we have a policy of we do not talk back to the other players. And we've had players swear at our guys and spit on them. We've had parents, yelling at them, and our kids, just for the most part, do not respond. And it's kind of something where we're in a situation where we try to create a culture where that's the rule, and then it becomes their rule. They start to own all these things. They start to really guide what we're doing, and we back off. You know what I mean? Let them steer the ship. It's a pretty amazing experience, I have to tell you.
And those are amazing lessons for life.
That's right. And that's really what it is. It's a microcosm, especially for boys, because they relate to things so physically. You know what I mean? Emotionally, they're not maybe as evolved as girls their age, but when it comes down to physically, they really are able to communicate in a way and understand things. So and soccer's a great sport because it is very physical, but it's not like football where you're just out there taking a beating. There's a high degree chance of getting hurt. And I also think, just to add to that, and like Richard was saying about the family thing and the camaraderie and all that, the kids develop a bond of trust with each other, and they learn to trust us as well. And like Richard's son is like a Swiss Army knife. I have had him play goalie. I've had him play defense. I've had him play midfield. The kid gets in the car on Saturday mornings in my car, and I drive him on Saturdays, and he says, "Coach, what position am I playing?" He's just like, he will just do whatever I ask him to do. He is just filled with trust now. And before he would, I don't want to play goalie. I don't want to do this. And then it's just complete trust. Well, I've had him, this tournament season, I've had him at different positions, and he's been frustrated with it. And in this last game, we were playing in the championship of a tournament against a super team. I mean, extraordinarily talented lead athletes. And he scored 2 goals, and it helped us win the championship of this tournament. And I think he finally was like, okay, I trust you. I'm here for a reason, And he had been frustrated, and boy, he delivered so enormously. And the kids trust us, we trust them. It's a matter of trust and creativity and honoring each other. And so far, so good, right? We still have a couple of tournaments left this season, and we have a big one on Memorial Day, so we're looking forward to it.
And now, as we kind of wind the show down here a little bit, Dr. Richard, we've talked about youth in sports, and that's been the main focus, but maybe just give us a couple minutes, like, how do you translate this to adults? Like, you see athletes who are adults who maybe didn't have this guidance when they were a kid. So, I know you can't go into a lot of depth, but like, what kind of things do you deal with adult athletes that come into you?
Yeah, well, Chris started to mention on a key point there, which is the speed of trust. There's a book out there right now, which is about the quicker that someone you can still build upon these concepts of team, of being completely egoless in support of another person. And when an athlete comes to you and they have always been pushing themselves and not letting anybody in, and they're probably doubting how you can get in and help them. How can you understand possibly the pressure they're under? To take the time to build that bond, to help them understand their unique block, and to help them settle into their own system. They're still a human being who's holding on to, a whole lot of emotion, whether it be from their season, their coaches, their teammates, their own personal, private relationships or struggles. So I want to help them in processing those things in a better way and give them a place to release it so that they can get back to, focusing on what they love and separate a little bit of their identity and the person and help them feel supported in defining both and in understanding, all that goes into being a teammate and all the dynamics that can really affect you if you're on a team where you don't feel connected, what's going on in the culture. So a lot of the things we do as sports psychologists build team, build the vision of team, build the vision and of leadership.
What if it's a tennis player or an athlete that plays on their own?
I want to help them get into their sense of what does it mean to be successful. Sometimes you have to step out of the emotions and get back into, the feeling. Again, probably what drew them to playing or enjoy playing was a sense of fun and excitement. And so I want to try and tap back into that and into their sense of identity. What does it mean to be out there, and what is it that's lost its meaning? What is it that, was it an injury? Is it the pressure, like we mentioned? Is it the success for an external purpose? What's affecting them right now?
Yeah, and that's a whole show in and of itself as well. But this has been a great show about youth sports.
Yeah, and each athlete's a unique person, and we have to understand them as individuals.
And it's great that I'm sitting here with 2 youth coaches that are trying to instill that in our youth. It's amazing. So, Chris, thank you for coming on the show. Any last words to the audience here?
Go Hollywood United. Big tournament Memorial Day weekend.
But thanks for being on the show. Chris
pleasure.
Johnson,
Thanks
music
for having me,
producer,
Peter.
youth soccer coach. And Richard, why don't you wrap things up and let us know where people can find you, Facebook,
Yes.
Twitter, website.
Thank you both for being here. You can find me at www.richardlistens.com and on Facebook, Richard Listens, and Twitter at Richard Listens. I think you get the theme. Private practice in Beverly Hills, and hopefully we'll be back here on the air soon.
Sounds good.
Have a great night. Yeah,
Thanks for joining us here on Richard Listens, and stay tuned on his Facebook page for an update on our next show, right?
And monthly blog posts. So.
Yes. So thank you for tuning in. Good night.